Episode of Becoming a Techno Wizard. Thoughts of a Techno Wizard is my podcast audio journal thingamajigger. But today we're going to jump right into another Hegel video, sections 38 and 39. Gonna just go right into it because I want to get through this quickly. I am tired, and it's almost holidays. Time to get off and just play some games or chill out or something. Granted, this is pretty engaging and chilling outing for me as well. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just tired, y'all. But I want to do this today because I don't know if I'll be able to do my Friday show tomorrow. But anyways, let's just go right into this thing. Bow.
Now, because the system of the experience of spirit embraces only the appearance of spirit, the advance from this system to the science of the true, in its true shape, seems to be merely negative, and one
Mm.
might wish to be spared the negative as something false, and to demand to be led to the truth without more ado. Why bother with the false?
Yeah. So we left off last time talking about this is why I usually do. I should probably do a recap. Um, talking about how the kind of the essence of thing, or rather the spirit, becomes its own antithesis and becomes its own meaning, like the objective or objectifying and the knowledge, right? The knowledge and the object are kind of become each other, but kind of have it gain its own meaning and understanding by this antithesis process, by us kind of seeing something by what it's not, um, and yeah, just going through this whole process and all this other stuff. So leaving off there now, because the system of the experience of spirit embraces only the appearance of spirit. So again, going to that where the experience of spirit is like the process of knowing, the process of learning, and things like that, right? Um, and in order for you to go through that, or as you go through that, you also have the appearance of spirit of consciousness, like the process of going through um, making knowledge and kind of engaging in consciousness also creates the appearance of conscious also creates it's the only way we know how it's the only way we know if somebody else or something else is conscious is if they also seem to go through the same process that we have, right? At least that's how I'm kind of taking this. It has advanced from the system to the science of the true, and its true shape seems to be merely negative, and one might wish to be spared the negative as something false, and demand to be led to the turn to the truth without more ado. Why bother with the false? So it's like, you know, if science is about the truth, right, and it's about getting the mere shape of the truth and stuff like that, then why do we have this negative? Why do we have false things? Why we worry about how we're going wrong or being proven wrong and things like that? It's probably going to get into the fact that um, you know by we don't actually know what's true or not until we figure out what is false. Like until we figure out what is not, then we know more about what's true, and the truth itself kind of updates as we go. But the point is that we have to kind of figure out what we know to be false, what we know to be untrue, in order for us to really appreciate, really discover uh, what is there to be true, or what is true.
One might wish to be spared the negative as something false, and to demand to be led to the truth without more ado. Why bother with the false? The view already discussed, namely that we should begin with science straight away, is to be answered at this point by examining the nature of the negative in general regarded as what is false.
Mm.
This is a topic regarding which established ideas notably obstruct the approach to truth. It will give us occasion to speak of mathematical cognition, in which
I'm not thinking as fast today. I might have to slow them down a little bit. Usually my brain is just like going, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just tired.
negative in general regarded as what is false. This is a topic regarding which established ideas notably obstruct the approach to truth.
Mm.
It will give us occasion to speak of mathematical cognition, in which unphilosophical knowledge regards as the ideal that philosophy must strive to attain, though it has so far striven in vain.
Mm.
At this point, by
Let's
examining the
back that up
nature
a
of the
little bit.
negative in general regarded as what is false.
This is a topic regarding which established ideas notably obstruct the approach to truth, right? So again, last section he was, or the section before that, I don't know. He was talking about the idea of fixed ideas or fixed concepts where people, especially now after you know the kind of previous forms of science, the previous states of science in which was a more nebulous concept where people were still trying to figure out what is true and what are the foundations of truth and all that other stuff. Now we are standing on their shoulders, but that also means that we have a kind of more fixed idea of what is true. Like we don't look in the sky, we don't look at the sun and be like, "Oh, what is that?" I wonder if that's a god. No, we know it's a big ball of gas in the cosmos, in the void, in the vacuum of space. And all these stars are not like gods and things like that. They're the other balls of gas far, far away. Like we know these things. However, this even though this can create a however, even though we know this stuff, even though we can prove this stuff and we can build science and things like that out of it, it creates a fixed mindset where it becomes difficult to find more truths. Like maybe, there's some other nuances with there and how it interacts with us and all this other stuff. So yeah, again, the established ideas notably obstruct the approach to truth. Yeah. It will give us occasion to speak of mathematical cognition, which unphilosophical knowledge regards as the ideal that philosophy must strive to attain, though it has so far striven. Oh, that's interesting. It will give us occasion to speak of mathematical cognition, which unphilosophical knowledge regards as the ideal that philosophy must strive to attain. So I think he's making a dig here, right? Because that does seem to be the case sometimes, where people regard math or mathematics as like, oh, this is what philosophy should be about. Why can't you have hard answers like math does? Like, but that's not what philosophy is about. That's not what makes philosophy valuable, right? It's the idea that you build all these foundations of knowledge. Because even with math, you can kind of make things to be true that is not necessarily true, right? And I think that goes into like Gödel's Gödel's theorem or whatever, Gödel's proof, where he was saying like you can have a mathematical um model or like system that is either complete or true, but you can't have both or something like that, right? It's pretty interesting, but yeah.
This is a topic regarding which established ideas notably obstruct the approach to truth. It will give us occasion to speak of mathematical cognition, in which unphilosophical knowledge regards as the ideal that philosophy must strive to attain, though it has so far striven in vain.
Mm. Break that down.
We are now roughly at the halfway mark in the preface to the Phenomenology of Spirit. And we've run through a number of very important themes, and Hegel has developed some of them fully, most of them not entirely, and we're going to see them show up as we move into the second half of the preface. In section 38, he is going to talk about negativity again, and science, system, appearance, phenomena, and truth and falsity. And he's going to continue this discussion of truth, of the true and the false, of truth and falsity, through the next several passages, the next several paragraphs.
Okay.
But it's going to run throughout the entire phenomenology. And he's made this point that he's going to stress here in this paragraph before, earlier on, but now he's going to reinforce it. So the question is, why bother with the false? And that's a good question. With a lot of things, we could say, look, what human progress really consists in is not having to mess around with doing everything from the ground up, not having to go through the entirety of an experience. Why shouldn't we just profit from the crystallized and reflected upon experience of others? And for many things, that actually works quite well. If you want to go online, there's many how-to videos that you can watch, and most of them are done by experts in their field, ranging from how to fix a sink to how to hotwire a car to how to do your taxes. How doing your taxes, of course, can be quite complicated. But the basic idea is, look, once we've actually figured out the best way to do something, or a good way to do it, let's just jump to the end. And Hegel is saying people might be tempted to do that with the Phenomenology. After all, look at how thick the book is, right? Why don't we just go to the very last few pages where everything has been set out? Or, could we maybe have a chart or an infographic, or maybe instead of having the half-hour Hegel series extending over all these videos, maybe we could just do it in an hour, just hit the bullet points, or better yet, 20 minutes maybe, or how about 3 minutes, because we have these 3-minute philosopher videos out there. And I don't mean to knock this series. It's good for what it does, but how much can you actually get across in 3 minutes? Hegel's saying there's going to be this temptation. What's been going on, he says, the system of the experience of spirit embraces only the appearance of spirit. So we're doing a phenomenology. We're concerned with what actually appears to us, what shows itself to us. The advance from this system to the science of the true in its true shape appears to be merely negative. So what is he talking about there? All these shapes of consciousness that spirit has had to go through in the course of human history and development have been negations of each other, surpassings of each other. And the question is, so we move from this shape, which at the time appears to be, this is it. This is the best we can do. And we've really achieved something here. And then, through the process of negation and the working of the dialectic, something new emerges. And then from that vantage point, we can look back, we can say, wow, if we're being a bunch of jerks, we say, look at those dummies, those suckers back there. They thought that was the way to, actually do things, or the way to think about things. If we're a bit more charitable, we say, they just didn't know what we know now, and we have a better vantage point from which we can understand not only the superiority of this point to this point, but also why it is that they were not able to see through to here.
Right.
Think, for example, we're going to talk about a lot of mathematical things in the next few paragraphs. Think about the development of the integral calculus, which was developed independently by Isaac Newton and by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who, by the way, got themselves into a kind of philosophical war over who had plagiarized from who. It turned out neither one had. And it led to partisanship that actually set British mathematics behind for quite a while mathematics proceeded better on the continent, because Leibniz had a better notation and because, larger number of people working on things.
Interesting.
Now, you can learn the integral calculus, at least the basics of it, the theory of limits, the idea of function, all these important ideas. You can learn that in a Calc 1 class. And you don't even have to go to college for that. If you're in a good high school, you might actually get that your senior year or junior year if you're pretty smart. If you're in European schools, you might get it even earlier. That took Leibniz and Newton incredible efforts of thought to work that out. Why didn't Descartes work it out? Why didn't Pascal work it out? They were brilliant men. They were brilliant mathematicians because things have to advance. And so there's this temptation that's inherent in doing this phenomenology that's running through history of saying, can't we just skip to the end? Can't you just give me the digested form, the fully articulated unity, whatever you want to call it, Hegel? Just give me the science, and don't bother me with all this historical background stuff.
Yeah, give me the
Hegel
product,
would say,
not the
look,
process.
buddy, it's not just background. This is where it's important that we sort of look back and recover what has been going on through this. There's a tendency to see all this as just false, as just a process of negation or negativity, and to write it off. And Hegel says that would be a big mistake. He says, why bother with the false? The view already discussed that we should begin with science straight away is to be answered at this point by examining the nature of the negative in general, regarded as what is false. Let's not assume that we automatically know what truth and falsity is, because those are sort of fixed, superficial ideas that we play around with. And he says, this is a topic regarding which established ideas notably obstruct the approach to truth. So a true approach to truth will actually be one that does justice to falsity. That may sound a little paradoxical. Hegel is also going to caution us against something that was prevalent in his time and also rears its head quite often for us. He says, it'll give us occasion to speak of mathematical cognition, which unphilosophical knowledge regards as the ideal philosophy must strive to attain, though so far it's striven in vain. And what do we mean by this mathematical cognition or mathematical mode of knowing and presentation? Well, one way to think about this is in terms of the quantifiable. Is everything truly quantifiable? There is an awful lot more that is quantifiable than people realize. But is just having numbers actually quantifying something? Don't the numbers need to actually match the phenomena that you're actually talking about? Not everything can be measured with a measuring stick. Think, for example, about how political scientists measure somebody on a spectrum from conservative to liberal. A lot of ad hoc assumptions built into that every time I go to a political science conference and watch, the show of some of these people presenting their research. As soon as they start getting away from the statistical models and talking about how they actually made the numerical cuts for this category, this category, this category, how they quantify things, I start to see, wow, there's a lot of jumps, a lot of leaps, a lot of assumptions being built in there. And so that's one problem. We don't want to jump over anything or just quantify for the sake of quantifying. There's also the sense that mathematics can provide us with absolute certainty about things, That's the way that non-mathematicians tend to look at mathematics, as if it's a kind of magic. When you actually get into mathematics and begin studying it, you'll be struck by several things. One is just how awesome things are, like the theory of limits in calculus. That's what actually made me decide to major in math. I was taking a Calc 1 class, which they put me in, and the teacher explained the theory of limits, and then I was hooked. Um, but you'll also realize that the foundations of mathematics themselves are rather murky, murkier than we think that they are.
Right.
That there's some paradoxes, some deep paradoxes involved in it. Those were actually realized later on beyond Hegel's time, but Hegel is right in calling attention to the sort of prejudice that people have of thinking that, look, if we can reduce things to axioms, or we can quantify, or we can have a sort of theory of proof that'll lead us through a deductive process, or even an inductive process. Let's
Goodness.
expand it. So long as we have a theory of probability and we can put things in terms of statistical statistical analyses, we'll be okay. And that works for some things. But you can't do a statistical modeling of how apt a statistical modeling is. You can come up with confidence intervals, true. But there's something about mathematics that means that even though it appears to be like the universal intellectual language, it's always a rather restricted operation that we're doing there.
Right.
And spirit is wider than that. So Hegel wants to caution us about that.
Nice.
True and false belong among those.
And what I was thinking before was Gödel's incompleteness theorem, if I remember correctly, where you can have all these axioms and stuff like that, but like he said, in math, you have a lot of parodies and not parodies, paradoxes. Goodness, you have a lot of paradoxes and kind of areas that don't really string together well because they're based on assumptions and all this other stuff or incomplete knowledge. And so therefore any sort of mathematical model we have or system we have um, cannot be 100% true if it's complete. Like if it can either be complete or 100% true, right? Because if it's true, then that means it can hold itself, right? And that means it creates infinities and paradoxes, and that doesn't really make sense for math. Anywhere they say anywhere where you see infinities or paradoxes, then you have a breakdown in that model. For instance, with math, so you can do a lot with math. You can figure out a lot. You can measure a lot, but it's not the end all be all, right? You just still have to kind of get out of that and philosophize and all this other stuff in order to find that truth and that information and knowledge and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a great tool.
Those determinate notions which are held to be inert and wholly separate essences, one here and one there, each standing fixed and isolated from the other, with which it has nothing in common. Against this view, it must be maintained that truth is not a minted coin that can be given and pocketed ready-made. Nor is there such a thing as the false any more than there is something evil. The evil and the false, to be sure, are not as bad as the devil, for in the devil they're even made into a particular subjective agent. As the false and the evil, they are mere universals, though each has its own essence as against the other.
I always like this idea. I always, say that myself. Like, people have this idea of good and evil, right? But it's such a silly idea if you get if you think about it. Not trying to take shots per se at a specific religion or person or anything like that. But like, you always know when somebody's a little bit like you know I don't want to say naive because people tend to call things naive that don't really deserve the title. Um, I mean, it is a good title in this case, but you can always tell how like ignorant or I guess naive is a nicer term. You can tell how people are thinking when they really think good and evil exists. Like there is a objectively good and objectively evil. Like evil when you see it. But throughout history, throughout humanity, you see so many occasions where you don't understand evil when you see it, right? When a lot of people today still don't understand evil when they see it, right? Because evil is subjective. It's based on what you think to be true or what you think is right or wrong in your personal moral system and the morals of the culture that you're in, the society that you're in, all this other stuff. There's so many things that play into it, right? Even things that you might think is categorically evil, bad, whatever. Somebody else in some other culture, or maybe you'd say the whole culture is bad, but the point is that like it's bad based on what you think is bad, and what we think is bad, because we share certain things, and sure we can agree upon some things that are probably evil, right, that are just bad for us as a species, but at the end of the day there's so much nuance in there, right? And I guess the same thing goes for true and false, right? We think something is false, but what is false except something that we thought was true before, right? So if you think something is true now, even something simple like the color of the sky, or the existence of stars and things like that, then we might discover something later on that makes all of this that we thought was inherently objectively true to be false. Like maybe the world is a simulation and everything that we're seeing is just made up, like Matrix thing. So it really is, yeah, it really is interesting once you realize the fact that true false doesn't really exist, good and evil and all this other stuff is useful. A lot of these concepts are really useful, but they are inherently subjective and conceptual and formation. Uh, but yeah, something like the devil, right, is very powerful of an idea because it's an embodiment of a thing. Like if you point to that person, you say they are the devil. You're saying that they're embodiment of these types of things. They're this subjective agent. They do the will of this evil thing, this bad thing. They do these actions in which you can point to and say that's okay. We don't like that, right? So yeah, it's very very powerful concepts here.
False any more than there is something evil. The evil and the false, to be sure, are not as bad as the devil, for in the devil they're even made into a particular subjective agent. As the false and the evil, they are mere universals, though each has its own essence as against the other. The false, for here it is only of this that we speak, would be the other, the negative of the substance, which as the content of knowledge is the true. But the substance is itself essentially the negative, partly as a distinction and determination of the content, and partly as simple distinguishing, that is, as self and knowledge in general. One can, of course, know
Mm.
something falsely. To know something falsely means that there is a disparity between knowledge and its substance. But this very disparity is the process of distinguishing in general, which is an essential moment in knowing. Out of this distinguishing, of course, comes their identity. And this resultant identity is the truth.
Mm. So it says, but it is not truth as if the disparity had been thrown away, like dross from pure metals, so it's not even like the tool which remains separate from the finished vessel disparity. Rather, as the negative, the self is still directly present in the true as such, yet we cannot say that the false is the moment of the true, let alone a component of it. So yeah, like many people regard, false as like, oh, something that's not, if it's not right, then it's just not, you shouldn't talk about it. It's just like kind of throw it out and whatever, but we learn a lot from it, you know there's some elements of truth in kind of falsities, if you will. um ooh, excuse me, goodness, whether that's the process that we got to that we did to get there, that we did to figure out that this is true or false or whatever, or how we identify the self and things like that. Yeah, it's great
But it
stuff.
is not truth as if the disparity had been thrown away like dross from pure metal, not even like the tool which remains separate from the finished vessel, present in a component which cannot be mixed and are only externally combined. There is a grain of truth is to treat the two like, let alone a component part of it. To say that in every falsehood there is a grain of truth is to treat the two like oil and water, which cannot be mixed and are only externally combined. It is precisely on account of the importance of designating the moment of complete otherness that the terms true and false must no longer be used where such otherness has been annulled.
Mm,
Just as to talk of the unity of subject and object, of finite and infinite, of being and thought, and so on, is inept, since object and subject, and those sorts of things, signify what they are outside of their unity. And since in their unity they are not meant to be what their expression says they are, just so the false is no longer qua false a moment of truth.
mm. Interesting. I'm looking to see how he breaks that
There
down
is a
because
lot.
he went back and forth a lot there, and I may have misinterpreted some of that because it seemed like he was actually saying, "Oh, maybe these should be kind of separate, and there is no, you can't have like some truth and false." Um, to me, seems counter to what you're saying before, in that you gain like what you thought was true becomes false, right? As you progress and learn more things, or maybe I'm just misinterpreting these things. But I don't know. Let's let him break down because my brain is just not working today.
There is a lot of stuff going on here in this paragraph 39, and so I'm probably going to have to do a bit of erasure on the board over the course of this, but I want to keep two ideas, two basic schemas, two understandings of truth and falsity up here so we can compare them. He says, he's starting out with what he thinks is actually off. He says, true and false belong among those determinate notions which are held wrongly, held by those who don't really get it, to be inert and wholly separate essences, one here, one there, each standing fixed and isolated from the other, with which it has nothing in common. And why isn't that okay? Think about the way that we handle truth and falsity in formal logic. They're just values. One can be a 1, one can be a 0. We can model them that way. You can actually set up circuits to do this. Well, that's not the same thing as truth and falsity in a broader, more encompassing sense. Hegel is not criticizing the correspondence theory of truth, if that's how you've learned it, from an Intro to Philosophy textbook, where truth is a correspondence between the mind or language and the thing being thought about or being spoken about. He's not criticizing a truth value, logical approach to things, in the sense of saying, look, these are completely valueless, but their value is within a very narrowly circumscribed field, and they're unable to actually take into account their own operations, what it is that actually motivates them, what it is that gives them meaning. There's a bigger concept, a bigger experience of truth, more encompassing, more appropriate to spirit as what it is that human being truly is. And this is just not going to cut it for philosophy. Truth and falsity are not mere universals. There's something dynamic about the relationship between truth and falsity, and also something reflexive. You could, if I depict it this way, say truth and falsity, there's a sort of a separation between them. Truth is over here, falsity is over here, and there's nothing in between them. Is that true? Is that a true representation of that? Then I've actually interjected truth right into that boundary in between them, which means that where I thought truth was not, truth actually is, which means that truth is more than what I originally thought it to be, which shows that we're engaged in a dynamic process here. Was my original way of thinking about it therefore false? Am I moving from greater truth, to greater truth from greater falsity? How does the falsity exist in relation to truth? Can I say that it's true that there was more falsity? You see all these sort of paradoxes that we can land ourselves into when we think in this way. And he says, against this view, it must be maintained, truth is not a minted coin that can be given and pocketed, ready-made. And again, he's stressing this about philosophical truth. Philosophical truth is something that requires that we actually do some work. It's not something that you could just get out of a Intro to Philosophy text with everything reduced to nice short bullet points, or a handout or something along those lines. Those are merely aids. They help us on the way, but they're not the actual truth. So he says, nor is there such a thing as the false anymore as there is something evil. The evil and the false. And why is he talking about the devil here? He says, they're not as bad as the devil. In the devil, they're made into a particular subjective agent. In the as the false and the evil, they're mere universals. And so, we could put over here, the nature of evil, negativity in general. The point that he wants to make, why would the devil be considered to be sort of the epitome of evil? Because the devil is a subject. There is agency. There's an intentionality. There's meaning. There's a destruction of meaning involved there. It's not just a mere empty, passive, inert universal that's available for us to think about. It's something else, personal, out there. So what should we counterpose to this? Hegel says, we want to actually, if we're going to think about this in terms of metaphysics, what we want to realize is that we're actually talking about the process of negation. And it's more complex than just saying things are true or they're false, and that's all there is to it. So the false would be the other, the negative of the substance, which as the content of knowledge is the truth. So what we got here is something that is being thought of, something that is being understood, something that is being engaged with by a subject
Mm.
that is trying to make sense of it, that is trying to assimilate it, right? And that subject has knowledge of what that other thing is, the substance. That is, and that's what truth, at least at that point, consists in. So where is falsity coming in? He says, the substance itself is essentially the negative, partly as a distinction and determination of content, partly as simple distinguishing. And so we've got this dialectic of, every substance is not just what it appears to be within a Hegelian phenomenology. It's always in relation to its other, which it may even sort of cast out of itself. It gives rise to its own contradictions, which then it has to assimilate, and we get this entire cycle going through, right?
Mm.
And alterity and negativity is built into that. What about the knowing subject in relation to this other? Does that mean that this is then, if this is true, then this is knowledge of what's false? Well, this is part of what it is to know the substance. So he says, what is it to know something falsely? And some people would say, well, you can't possibly know something falsely. There's no such thing as false knowledge. You have to understand here that Hegel understands knowledge as something which can itself be dynamic and grow and incorporate, and so it can start out being false and slowly, eliminate that falsity from itself. So to know something falsely means there's a disparity between knowledge and its substance. And we have experiences of this all the time. Let me give you just one example. We think that we actually know somebody, and meaning we understand the way that they work, we know something about their background, we know the kind of person they are, and we get into a situation with them, and oftentimes we'll say, well, I didn't really know them at all. And other times we'll say, well, I didn't realize that they had this one thing about them that led them to be a complete jerk, to be unreliable. Our knowledge was not true knowledge of the subject. And if you want to use, other terms instead of knowledge and say, well, we merely had opinion, or doxa, or pick whatever you like, that's fine. I don't think Hegel would quibble with you there. But what Hegel wants to get at is to say, look, when we realize that there's something that we thought that we had true knowledge of, and then we realize there's a disjunction between us as the knowing subject and what it is that we're trying to get to know, we're bothered by that. We want to try to overcome that, and that itself spurs us into this process of trying to grasp how this substance is actually connected with its other.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
He says, this very disparity is the process of distinguishing in general, which is an essential moment in knowing. Out of this distinguishing comes the identity of knowledge and what is being known. And the resultant identity is truth. So truth is something that grows within the process. So he says, it's not as if the disparity had been thrown away like dross from pure metal, not even like the tool that remains separate from the finished vessel. Rather, the negative is still involved in the truth. We cannot say that the false is just a moment of the true, or even a component of it. Because then we're going back to this point of view, where truth and falsity are like oil and water. They just don't mix together. You sort of like separate them out. You let something that's emulsified sit for a while, and the oil goes over here, and the watery parts over here like salad dressing, right? So he says, it's precisely on account of the importance of designating the moment of complete otherness that the terms true and false are going to be out of place. If we're taking the perspective looking at things in terms of development, then true and false are perfectly appropriate for us to use, just like the other terms that he's going to talk about in just a second, by way of example. When we're looking at where we get to, the whole that we're cognizing, which we're also a part of, then terms like true and false are no longer as useful as terms like, substance and otherness or negativity. And so he says, let's think of some other terms like this. Subject and object, finite and infinite. Being and thought. To talk about the unity of these, this is an important point, to say that there's a unity of object and subject, Hegel doesn't want to fall into a kind of mysticism where, like we said before, all cows, it's the night in which all cows are black. He says, object and subject signify what they are outside of their unity. It's only insofar as they are something different from each other that you can speak of them as object and subject, as having a certain relation between them. The subject cognizing the object, the subject working upon the object resisting the subject, these sorts of things, the subject desiring the object. Once they're actually brought into some sort of unity, if you're taking that perspective, It doesn't make sense to talk of them as being a unity of subject and object, he would say.
Hmm.
And
They
it's
just
the
become
same thing
this
with,
own
with,
thing.
with a unity of truth and falsity. So he says the false, from that point of view, is no longer as false a moment of truth.
Mm. Interesting stuff there. So basically, you know, yeah, like it's less about the what is true and what is false once we reacclimate, once we put it back into, once we have this process of negation, this otherness, then we can figure out, okay, this is true, this is false, this is true, this is false, you know but as we reintegrate it, it becomes something different. It's no longer about being true or false. It's about being like the subject, I suppose, or the notion or the shape or this new knowledge. And there's a constant process of kind of you know fissioning and fusioning away from the idea of using truth and falsity. At least that's how I'm understanding it. Or no, I think that's it. I was gonna say, or maybe like we no longer need to use the truth and false. I don't know. I think that's it. um, Super curious to see how he's gonna get more into that in the coming sections. Um, Again, it seems to me like there's like a time to use the idea of true and false and a time when it's not, right? Or maybe you don't even need the idea of true and false at all very much, and it's just that subject and otherness idea. Um, I don't know. Well, I guess we'll see. Hegel's pretty interesting. I'm super invested here. Um, really enjoyed doing this. But it's time for me to maybe take a nap or something. And happy holidays to y'all. It's the 23rd. May or may not do a episode tomorrow. I don't know. We'll see. But regardless, either way, have a happy holidays. I'll see you next week before the New Year's. I think. Yeah. And thanks again. And have a great day. See ya. Bye bye.